And the conversation we have with the private equity sponsor is, what are your long-term goals for this organization? Are we going to provide you with a IT solution that has a 5-year ROI? Your horizon for this investment is 3 years. So it's the ability to have those kind of conversations at the financial level, at the strategic level, rather than just at the technical level. That's, I think, one of the things that differentiates a CISO type of conversation from a technical or a sales type of conversation. Are we doing the right thing for the customer? This 5-year ROI solution might have made me 100% more margin, but it's not the right thing to do for the customer. And so if we do the right thing for the customer, we will keep that customer long term. That's the bottom line. Again, it's this combination of what is right for me is right for the customer. What's right for the customer ultimately is right for me long term.
For years, managed service providers have been the quiet backbone of their clients' IT operations, patching systems, guiding strategy, and stepping in when things went wrong. But today, a new pressure is building. Clients aren't just asking for technical advice, they're asking for executive level security leadership. They're asking their MSP, in essence, to become their CISO. And that raises a big question. At what point does helping the client cross the line into holding responsibility you were never meant to carry as an MSP? I'm Charles Weaver, and today on the MSP Zone, we're joined by Neil Holm and Travis Springer to dissect one of the most pressing debates in our profession: how much is too much when MSPs step into vCISO territory? Is it a natural evolution of the trusted advisor relationship, or is it a dangerous conflict of interest waiting to happen? Let's jump in. Neil Holm is a respected leader and business owner at Impact Business Technology, known for his deep involvement in MSP sector issues and his collaborative work within the MSP Alliance community. He regularly engages in strategic discussions on topics such as cybersecurity policy, vCISO service models, and industry standards, contributing thoughtful and pragmatic insights. Travis Springer is the president of Sagis and a seasoned cybersecurity professional holding the CISSP certification. Longtime contributor to the MSP Alliance community, he frequently provides expert commentary on complex security operational topics, including the role of MSPs in vCISO services and national cyber policy. Both companies hold MSP Verify certification. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hey, Charles.
Did I do it justice? Any corrections there?
No, I think you summed that up pretty well.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's dive right in. I'd like to maybe start with both of your perspectives of what I would characterize perhaps as an attempt to rewrite history in some small part, which I've seen in the last 5+ years, which is this notion that MSPs prior to 2020 just never touched security, never entered the C-suite. They were never involved in intimate, high-level discussions with their business customers. And I would just like to start with your basic general opinions on that concept of now going into 30 years, 3 decades or more of managed services. Is this a true statement, or is that kind of, missing the point?
I think that's a load of hooey. We turned 25 this year, and I look back at the very first proposals that we sent out to customers, and every single one of them started with, the thing's got to be secure, it's got to be reliable, and it's got to be functional. So we led with security 25 years ago. Now, that's not to say that security we talked about then is the same as security we talk about now, but you couldn't deliver a good system without covering all 3 of those things.
Travis?
Yeah. I mean, not to be outdone, but we turned 29 this year. But yeah, thinking back, I mean, and even this is time that predates me, but security's always been part of it. Like from the earliest days, I remember hearing about, logging into companies' printers from the WAN because they didn't have a firewall. That's security. We were doing that from day one. I think I should have two thoughts here. One, we've always talked about being trusted advisors, getting into the C-suite, getting access to that level of the business owner. We don't want to be just a service provider. We want to be seen as a trusted advisor partner. That whole talk track that we have around that. That's been in the market forever. The other thing I think that's maybe, I don't know, confused or diluted the market a little bit was the rise of this managed security service provider and this 24/7 SOC, SIM, log analysis stuff that we weren't doing, because MSPs have always been doing firewalls, backup, spam filtering, patching, antivirus, now EDR. We've been doing that for forever. And so I think, kind of taking those as table stakes, the MSSP came out with like, oh, well, we do this extra stuff and it's really expensive. And it's really, in my opinion, it's mostly reactive, not proactive. And MSPs were saying like, our clients don't have the budget or the appetite for that. And we kind of stayed apart. And so I think we let that delineation crop up, 10 plus years ago, that like real and like kind of to our own detriment, real security services are this other thing. But we've been doing security, firewalls, backup, patching, like that's for almost 30 years. That's what we've been providing for our clients.
So I want to pick up on that, Travis, because that's an interesting point. Aside from maybe your colleagues in the enterprise sector who had SIM products and had teams who were reading SIM logs, and a very important but boring job, especially back then when you didn't have AI and some of these automation tools. Right. In the mid-market and the SMB market, there wasn't a large demand for that. No one would have paid for it, even if it was cost available. It wasn't cost available until very, very recently. And you're absolutely correct. You were the only people on the planet, MSPs who were operationally advanced like both of you are, to actually mention to a client, you ought to think about using strong passwords. You ought to think about deploying like an MX Logix, cloud-based email security filtering solution. Right? There's other ones out there. I just mentioned them as a example. But I mean, you guys were MSSPs, even if you weren't calling yourself that. And I think that flies directly against this whole, you have to be an MSSP today in order to be viable. Neil, your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think you kind of described this in the intro. This has been a natural progression, which is how the industry has reached this point. The customers are starting to demand this because they're being pressed by their customers, or they're being pressed by their boards. And so MSPs have reacted to that by developing these services. The mature MSPs have led this by bringing their customers along before an issue occurs. But this has been a natural progression to get us where we are. But I think now, as you raised in the intro, now we have to ask ourselves, is this the right place that we landed at? Or should there be something else? Is this the place where the industry has gone? And to be fair, we know this has gone mainstream now because there are products and services out there that help you be a vCISO. And, what makes this country great is this spirit of entrepreneurship. There was a gap, somebody filled it, and now everyone can jump in. But the question we're grappling with is this the right place for us to be? Or should we separate from this and say, well, we can be the trusted advisor. We're advising you from impact standpoint to what we believe you, the customer, need. But this notion of being a CISO is this inherent conflict of interest that I know you're going to bring up next.
It's coming. And we all know, we all share we have a relationship and know a common attorney who is well known in her, stance on, vCISO types of activities, which is part of what we're going to get into momentarily and parsing that out, because I think that there's also some very liberal, very loose, liberal meaning free and open in terms of the use of CISO, vCISO types of services that may be applied very differently than what the actual definition from a textbook definition means. But let's go back to this evolution. So we've established that both of you as kind of prototypical MSPs serving the small, medium-sized, maybe up into some of the mid-market sectors, have been around for decades. You like many, many, many other MSPs have been doing this and getting involved in offering security, but not just offering the security. I want to ask you about this idea that somehow MSPs prior to 2020, and I'm using that as a distinction for a number of reasons, not only because it was the pandemic onset year, but it was also a major catalyst for a lot of this change. Prior to 2020, explain how you guys weren't just like sitting on the data center floor, cabling, doing a bunch of technical stuff. You guys were already in the C-suite. Talk to me about that, Travis.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, like it's strong relationships with clients and referrals and just kind of the way our businesses sustain and grow is having that good relationship. And the best way to do it is to get involved with the senior leadership and management of your clients. Um, like to kind of getting away from that transactional service provider, making yourself more essential to their business. Like one of the things we talk about, and again, this is like I feel like this is pretty common. This isn't earth shattering stuff, but our best clients value technology and security as a essential strategic part of their business success, not as a cost center, check the box, get the agent on my machine and get out of my way. And those are the clients where the C-suite is involved because it is strategic to them how they're moving their business forward using technology, and being ahead of it and being proactive. Like Neil said, like we're always trying to be pulling our clients forward. We don't want to be reacting to client requests. If I've never heard of SIM, what does that mean? I don't know. Let me figure it out. And finding the clients who are open and receptive to that, and then being engaged with them and sitting on leadership committee meetings and providing feedback. Like again, I think the 2020 inflection point was a great time just as far as the way all of our businesses had to change, where it got us even more into the clients who were maybe a little more resistant, a little less engaged because of whether it's insurance or security events. Yeah, no, we've always been there. I think what's changing now is the demand and the appetite for some of these additional services that we've always been open to talking about and trying to talk about. That I'll be the first to say that a business continuity plan is not the most exciting thing in the world, but yeah, you should have one. We've been doing one for
Travis, you're just not doing it right. I always have
Got to
disco
make it
balls.
fun.
So I think a good part of this is also self-preservation. There's no better catalyst for losing a customer than having a security event. So along with us pulling the customer forward, it's us putting in place what we know they need. And so it is this mutually beneficial process. We protect our customer, they retain with us, and there needs to be that mutual respect there, that they trust us and we're doing the right thing for them. But history will prove itself right. If you don't have security events and you can react to the incidents that happen, you'll have a customer for life.
Gentlemen, I just want to hopefully destroy once and for all this notion that prior to 2020, you were just having conversations with the director of IT or someone at that level and just interacting at a purely or predominantly technical level. It sounds like from both of you, and I know both of your companies pretty well, you were having very meaningful, very high level discussions in the quote C-suite, regardless of what those conversations were. We'll talk about that, Neil, as you brought up. But you were there. You were already there. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
So one final transitional question to ask, which is I sensed a change in 2020, and it was actually happening before then, maybe a year or two before, but it really started to become apparent for perhaps a number of reasons we can't get into right now. But filling out cyber security insurance forms, leading up to and through the pandemic, I remember that very well. I remember talking to a lot of people saying, well, yeah, of course we're doing it. And then there was people who were charging for it, people who weren't charging for it, right? And it changed a lot. Could you both talk about and address that as as a symptom of something larger that was happening, which was your presence in the C-suite was now starting to bear fruit, and you were now beginning to be asked really serious questions that weren't just technical. They were crossing the threshold into something else.
Yeah, so I can recount a conversation I had just today where we're talking to a private equity firm about providing services to one of their portfolio companies. And the conversation we have with the private equity sponsor is, what are your long-term goals for this organization? Are we going to provide you with a IT solution that has a 5-year ROI? Your horizon for this investment is 3 years. So it's the ability to have those kind of conversations at the financial level, at the strategic level, rather than just at the technical level. That's, I think, one of the things that differentiates a CISO type of conversation from a technical or a sales type of conversation. Are we doing the right thing for the customer? This 5-year ROI solution might have made me 100% more margin, but it's not the right thing to do for the customer. And so if we do the right thing for the customer, we will keep that customer long term. That's the bottom line. Again, it's this combination of what is right for me is right for the customer. What's right for the customer ultimately is right for me long term.
Travis, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cyber insurance underwriting forms, that's kind of been this like talking point for a few years now. I think that took our clients who didn't already see it, and it was just another big opportunity um, to engage with them at that higher level, because now the cyber insurance made it more of a risk conversation. You could put it was much more tangible dollars being put to what we were presenting instead of just a cost. And I really see that as what's kind of driven and facilitated a lot of the growth and expansion and security services that we've been providing to clients. That the cyber insurance underwriting is what drove that. Things like vulnerability management and 24/7 SOCs and things like that we've been talking about for a decade. But for most clients, they're kind of like, I don't really know what that means, and does it like they kind of fall back on you guys have been doing good work for us for the last 10 years. Why do we need to be doing more to keep doing what you've been doing? It's been working. Obviously, we all know that that's not exactly how it works, but small business owners are they view things differently from their perspective.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to pivot and now begin to introduce ideas that I acknowledge that there's to be no blanket response for this. And I hesitate to even call it CISO v CISO, because these are not necessarily all v CISO types of roles. But I think that this is going to lead up to the ultimate question of what is too far? What is a conflict? Because I think that there are naturally going to be things that you're going to be asked to do as an MSP that you shouldn't do for reasons we'll talk about shortly. But I want to start introducing examples of, and we just did with insurance, right? That was a very good test case for the continued presence of the MSP inside the C-suite with regards to a very obvious business issue, right? Getting cyber insurance for a business, you can't think of anything more C-suite-esque. But I want to talk about the antagonist in this story, which is the cybersecurity consultant who started roughly at the same time to enter the dialogue and enter the relationship, trying to gain access to the C-suite, and in some cases actually succeeding, and beginning to cause, my interpretation, serious problems by interjecting vCISO types of ideas into the end user, which brought great conflict sometimes with the customer and their MSP. And I'll just use one of those examples. It really wasn't insurance, but it was, for example, doing EDR, MDR. Right? If the MSP had positioned that with the customer previously said no, but now a cyber consultant comes in and says, you really ought to have it. And then it's now, well, why didn't you have it before? Your MSP didn't do it. Therefore, the MSP was in some way bad. I heard that happen a lot. I don't know if you guys ever saw that over the last 7-8 years, but I know that happened. And just your thoughts about that generally as a concept.
I mean, I think fortunately we did not have that happen. I think that speaks to just our relationship with clients and the way we've done things over the years. Do you think that the and not to like jump too far ahead on anything here, but I think that the cyber consultant vCISO space should exist. I think there's room for that. I think the issue is when the consultant starts to provide services that especially when they're not providing a holistic security package. It's just, hey, I'm going to sell you EDR and KnowBe4, and that's it. That's not
meaning no other IT.
Right.
That's what
because those are easy.
Okay.
I can sell you CrowdStrike backed by their SOC. I can automate the KnowBe4 stuff, and it's mailbox money for my consulting practice. I think that is hugely misguided. The consulting practice on its own, I don't have a problem with, right? Like within certain bounds and stuff like that. But like, I don't think that is inherently bad. I think that and I could say the same on the flip side on the MSP piece, but I'll leave that for, I know we're getting there.
Well, yeah, Travis, I think you're right. None of these products exist in a vacuum. They are all integrated. You can't do EDR without an excellent hardware inventory and user inventory and access to actually make changes. You can't offer security awareness training unless you know about the industry. None of these are cookie cutter type of implementations. And then certainly if these are put into place, let's say, for example, we didn't offer EDR. Now all of a sudden we're expected to work with this EDR vendor, or maybe now we're working with 4 or 5 EDR vendors. It makes us a lot less efficient, a lot less effective, and is a disservice to the customer. So yeah, I mean, it's not a problem if they act as a consultant alone and say, you should have an EDR service. When here's the one your MSP recommends, that will fit the bill. Check the box. Everyone's happy.
So let's get practical and specific. Let's talk pen testing, penetration testing. We have long held at MSP Alliance that penetration testing is one of those things that it's highly advisable for an end user customer to have. I think it's highly advisable for an MSP to get if they can, cost justify it. My question to both of you, should an MSP be in the business of delivering penetration testing services to an end user customer for whom they are managing something, anything within the IT stack? Your thoughts?
No, I think
Travis?
that's an inherent conflict of interest.
Yeah. Yeah. Houston's not that far from here. Enron, Arthur Anderson, when the auditors are doing the remediation work, there are problems. Yeah, you should know. And that's been for us, that's been a long-standing, we will never pen test our clients. And we tell our clients up front, you don't want us to pen test you, and here's why. Because if you want to rely on it, especially now as the pen tests aren't just a good housekeeping exercise. If we're going to do a pen test proactively because we want to make sure our stuff is good, that's great. But when the pen test is coming from insurance and compliance and regulation, and there's teeth and consequences behind an incident or a compromise, and that this stuff is going to get surfaced back with lawyers and law enforcement and God knows who else, just the court of public opinion, probably the scariest of all of those. I don't, as an MSP, we need to protect ourselves and distance ourselves from.
Okay. So Neil, you said conflict of interest. Definitely agree, right? You can't test what you're managing actively. It's too close, but it doesn't mean that you can't be involved in facilitating. Would you go that far? Would you be comfortable referring out? Would you just say to the customer, you're on your own, figure it out? Where do you stand on?
Yeah, so we have 3 or 4 vendors that we use, and we will cycle them through every couple of years with each customer so that it's not the same pen tester twice in a row. We get differencing of opinion, of methodologies, of reporting, and the customer gets a slightly different experience each time. No one pen tester is going to know everything, and we've got a few that we will refer you to, but it is a direct relationship between the customer and the pen tester. The contract doesn't flow through us, the payment doesn't flow through us.
Okay. So Travis, any issues with that approach to
exactly what we do?
Okay. What about, so you've articulated a very arm's length transactional process for pen testing. You handle it, you make the referral.
I would call it transparent, not arm's length, right? We're still involved in the process. We're still setting the scope. We're still working with the pen test to get it set up, providing information. We want to be part of it because we don't want to lose control of the relationship where the pen testers come in and we found all this stuff and now your MSP sucks. We want to maintain some relationship there, but we want the contract on their paper. We want the payment to flow through. We want them to communicate directly with the client when it comes time for the report and all that stuff. But we don't. So it's. I like transparency more than arm's length.
Okay, fair enough. I accept that point. Let's now assume that the pen test has been completed. Do either of you have an issue with what is your level of involvement with the pen test report or the results? Most pen testing services have some sort of, probably a perfunctory report that's generated, the findings. Are you involved as the MSP of record in the reading and the digestion and the after action, if you will, of the pen test report and anything that could come out of it, including recommendations, changes? Where do you stand on that issue?
Yeah, I mean, we sit on the client side of the table in that conversation of we take as much ownership of the network as they do that was being pen tested. So any of the results and findings are feedback on effectively our services and the proactive work we've been doing to protect the client. So yeah, we take the report the same as the client does, and for most small businesses, that client might as well be in Latin to them, but we know how to translate it, how to remediate it. And one of the things we always require of any pen test written into the agreement is that anything that's in their report, give us a period of time to remediate it and then retest those same vulnerabilities. And then don't amend the report, but just kind of issue an addendum to it that says, we did this pen test, we found these 5 things. Within 30 days, they remediated 3 of the 5, and we retested and confirmed that they are fully remediated and close the loop. So again, don't just take our word that we fixed it. They're actually going to retest it for us.
One of the things we tend to step in the middle of is interpretation of the results. So pen tester typically has zero context of what it is they're looking at and how they are approaching. If they manage to get into the network through some means, they can say, oh, well, I found this system that has these vulnerabilities. Yeah, well done. That is a sandbox that we left there for you. It's a honey trap that we left there for you. They don't know this. They report on it as a disaster. We add the context, we add the translation, and then all of these things. A vulnerability is irrelevant if it has no value and no exploit path. So we then add that risk to it so that we can then present it to the customer.
So Neil, you just brought up an excellent point. You're right. You're doing something that without the context of why you did something, a pen tester who had no visibility would potentially create tremendous damage, tremendous harm by making a recommendation of your MSP is doing some crazy things here. Why did they do that, right? And absent that knowledge, that they would otherwise, act ignorantly, right? Without knowledge, without wisdom, and that's not good. Can we? Okay, so there seems to be agreement between both of you that that's a fairly standardized approach to something that you don't do, you will never do, because it will be disruptive to your managed services practice, but you acknowledge that it has to be done and best to refer it out. But to use a medical analogy, you are you are the primary physician. You are directing care for your customer, even when it involves a professional outside of your own respective companies.
Now, it's not to say we never do it. Sometimes we will get engaged with a customer as a pen test, and that will then lead to remediation and managed services. But once we're in, we can't pen test ourselves.
You stop. Okay. Yeah, fair enough. So shifting to another question, your thoughts, both of you, on this idea that just as, and I'm really talking about managed services at the SMB level, maybe at the lower end of the mid-market level. I'm not really talking about co-managed services relationships, although I suppose it could exist here. But in most of your relationships with customers, would it be safe to say that these customers do not have a CSO, CISO type of person or entity or anything like that, and they will likely never have the ability or the inclination to hire that type of a role? What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, that's a true statement. Probably 90% of our customers have zero experience in that field and don't want it.
They don't want it. Meaning even if they had the budget, they probably wouldn't want to hire that type of thing.
No, it's not core to their services. It's not core to their mission. That is a definite outsourced function that they're looking for.
Travis, your thoughts?
Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah, I mean, small businesses, it doesn't make sense, except there's going to be the exceptions that prove the rule, that 0.01%. But the vast majority of privately held small and medium businesses are not going to be able to justify the expense and also just I think like the governance overhead that having a real full-time CISO entails. The same is true for the fractional CFO industry, fractional HR, outsourced IT. It just doesn't make sense for small businesses full time.
So I'm asking to build the case that the average SMB, smaller sized mid-market entity is not just not equipped, not budgeted, not capable financially of hiring that full-time CSO, CISO person or entity, but they are having not in the abstract, but in individual elements, they are having to deal with CISO style discussions and conversations internally that perhaps started pre 2020 with, how do I fill out this cyber insurance form? All right, that's not. The CFO has no idea how to do that. The CEO doesn't know how to do that. Even if they had a full-time internal IT director, they probably have, at best minimal things to say and contribute to that type of a form. And we haven't even gotten into questions like CMMC compliance, filling out cybersecurity questionnaires from customers and third parties who are interested in knowing how that entity operates. These are legitimate CISO types of discussions, are they not?
Yeah, they are. And I think, thinking about especially those first round of cybersecurity forms we saw, we were very clear. We're not submitting this form for you. We're going to make recommendations on the answers based off the services we provide. And a lot of times what that looked like was yes, 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 no, yes, no, yes, no. And then a series of like, these are more internal policies and procedures and documentation that probably belong closer to your employee handbook than anything else. And Sage does not, and Sage does not provide those. So like, I don't know if it's a yes or a no. And on some of those earlier ones, like, do you have the 24/7 SOC? No, you don't, but we can sell you one. And like, so those were, that part of it was a great conversation. The more organizational governance stuff, that was a little hairy. Of clients were like, well, can you give me one? I can't give you an incident response plan. Doesn't quite work that way. And so that was kind of that first iteration, of how that worked.
Well, okay, now I have to ask a question. Are you not wanting, but let's use a practical policy document, information security policy, right? All of you have to have it to get your MSP verify, but it's not just, we're not the only framework out there that has it. SOC 2 has it, CMMC has it, ISO 27001 has it. Most of the dominant global frameworks have that. If your customers are now facing reality of we should probably have this type of a document, we don't have a CISO or CSO on staff, who else are they going to call but their MSP? What then should the response be? Are you, Neil, are you going to get involved in that conversation? Because they're going to call you up and ask you, are they not?
Yeah, on the policy side, if it's purely the technical information security policy, absolutely, we will provide those for them. Where it gets into the acceptable use policy, it's getting into a gray area because some of those are organizational choices, not technical choices. And then when it gets into the HR background check policies, we're hands off with those.
You won't even, would you advise if they came to you and said, should we do this? Should we not do it? Are you going to say that's none of our business? Or are you going to say, this is what I think you ought to do, but you have to make the choice in the end?
Yeah, it's. I'll give them examples. I'll tell them how we run our business because our business, even though we're a IT service provider, we're still a business. We still have employees. We have financial obligations. I'll tell them our experience, but that's as far as it goes. I am not a legal HR or financial consultant, and nor do I want to be.
Travis,
Same.
you
Yeah,
share
we
that?
provide templates and some consulting around, advice. I use consulting liberally there, like advice on how to adapt to these templates. But like one of the common ones I use when talking about this is the business continuity plan. I think because insurance and regulation, a lot of it around IT is asking about business continuity. Everyone assumes it's a full IT function, but how do you communicate with your employees and your clients and your vendors in the event like that is not something, especially as an MSP, that we're going to handle. You need to address that as part of your business continuity planning, but I don't have the answers. I don't know if Microsoft 365 is down, no one's going to get your emails anyway, so maybe it doesn't matter. But how you do that and what your plan is for it, having a list of all your employees' personal cell phone numbers, like that's your business we can help you with it. And at least, kind of, or where we prompted the question of like, okay, we talked about all the IT stuff and your servers fail over here and you have offsite backups and all. Okay, that's all good. What about the people? What about like, do you get checks in the mail? Do you have shipping and receiving that happen in your business? Just asking the questions and prompting the conversation. We get into that, but even that kind of as the company size grows and their complexity increases, that's where we start to get out of our depth as the MSP service provider, technical and security specialists. You get into more of like business operation function stuff. That's just not really what we're built for.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think for customers that are like us, a professional services organization, we can have a much better conversation with them. But when it becomes a manufacturing, logistics, or distribution style business, yeah, we are out of our depth, and I'm perfectly happy to say, I don't know.
I want to tease some scenarios here because now we're talking about, we're at the line, just like with pen testing. Although pen testing seems to be a bright fluorescent green line that, is very easy to see. This seems to be razor thin, not very well marked, and a bit more fluid, shall we say. So I hear both of you saying that you are involved, perhaps the same way you were with the pen testing example, except in this case, you're not referring this out. You're keeping this closer to the vest. You're telling the customer what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do. Can we all agree that what I heard was you're not willing, neither of you are willing to say, I'm going to be responsible for making this decision? You're flatly saying, I'm giving you advice, but you have to make a decision on how you want this particular thing to happen. True, not true?
Absolutely true. It cannot be our paper that all of these policies are written on.
I'm not a member, manager, shareholder, partner, officer, board member, whatever legal structure of governance you have at your organization. I am not that. So I can't assume that level of like, I had a CPA firm ask me this a couple weeks ago. They're like, hey, we have all this information security stuff. Can you guys be the information security officer in our documents? Can I put Sagis as that seat or a person at Sagis as that seat? And I said, absolutely not. And he's like, why not? And I'm like, you don't pay me enough. I was blown with him.
Okay, but that's a risk.
I want 2% of your profit. Like, I don't know. What are we like? I want to be a shareholder. If I'm taking that level of risk with the organization, I want the upside that comes with it.
That's the thing, Travis. This is a risk, and that's what people don't understand. You are taking a fiduciary responsibility when you step into that seat.
Right. That's the equivalent of being listed on corporate documents as a service of process, right? You don't want to be the one that gets handed those data discovery notices and claims. But nevertheless, let's talk about business continuity planning, either as a standalone policy or maybe as a broader information security policy project. CEO of a customer is saying to both of you, Travis, Neil, I don't know how often we ought to be backing up our data, and I don't know how often we ought to be testing it for restore, capability purposes. Can you give me any advice on this so I can at least complete this? Are you not willing to even talk about those types of things?
No, we can, but it's advice. It is not, it's up to them to still make the decision. Again, it comes down to this issue of risk. If you're talking about a backup plan, should you be backing up your data once an hour, once a day, once a week? Well, that depends on your business. Let's talk about what this means for you. So we can have those conversations, but the decision rests with the customer, because each of those comes with a different financial cost. And again, we can't make those decisions for them. We can recommend, we can advise, but we can't decide.
So if I hear that, and I'm the customer here, and I say, all right, I'm hearing what Neil and Travis are willing to do. I'm hearing what they're not. I can't put them on our corporate documents as a person to be notified in certain events. I get that. That's too much risk for them. Fine. But I still need some advice on how to complete this set of policy documents. And let's assume I started with nothing. I need to get to a point where either I'm achieving SOC 2 or I'm achieving CMMC, or I'm just trying to get my cyber insurance down to a reasonable level. What if I go to Bob's cyber consultancy down the street, and Bob doesn't do anything IT? All he's going to do is be a consultant. Is that a risk to have me, the client, start to play footsie with somebody who is going to take affirmative steps to write out policy statements and shape a set of policy documents and actually start to change governance within the environment? Does that become a risk to you guys? And if so, at what point?
I think what Travis mentioned before is when they cross the line between advice and execution, that's when it becomes a risk to us. Up until that point, no, it depends on the relationship that we have with them.
I think also similar to the pen test conversation, we try to have a list of referral partners that we are recommending to the client, right? So rather than finding Bob's cybersecurity consultancy on Google or Facebook or wherever the hell they find them, we, kind of in an effort of staying in charge of that conversation, can say, hey, this is actually getting a little bit out of our depth, and you're asking us to do stuff that's kind of out of the scope, and you've pushed us past that limit where we're comfortable. A couple of people that we've worked with in the past that we think that work really well with us, that we can bring in to help you. Again, they're going to engage you directly on their paper. Because I think, one of the big values you get with that, I think we've gotten to the vCISO conversation here, is like the thing that they won't do that they do that most MSPs won't, is getting into that cross-functional operation, finance, HR, IT, blending all of that at like an executive level. That's just it's not core enough to what we do, at least at this point. And then the other thing, which is why I don't know that we will get there ever, is just the accountability side of, don't take my word for it, right? Like, yeah, of course, all your policies and plans are great and all the systems are perfect. And like, that's why I sell you every month. You want someone who's able to hold us accountable. I think from the risk side, especially with this is where for us, we want to maintain as much control as possible without creating a conflict, is when they do bring in an unknown third party, you've got to hope that that unknown third party doesn't have a buddy with an MSP that he gets a kickback from and is going to just make you look bad. And so that's where those were obviously much more careful with, and how we engage them and document and making sure your ducks are in a row. Those are a little more risky, I think.
So if I'm talking, Neil, if I'm talking to Bob's cyber consultancy and Bob happens to either know another MSP, or worse still, he actually is a reseller for one or two cyber education training platforms and MDR, EDR tools. And he's willing to go in there and offer those in direct contradiction or competition to what you're offering. That does bring in real conflict, potentially, correct?
It does. So, I'll talk in the abstract, because for our customers, they all get that as standard. There is no negotiation. There are no gaps in coverage. But yeah, where there's an opportunity to sell a product to fill a gap, there is an absolute risk. And as you said earlier, if you previously offered this for the customer, or they determined that it wasn't appropriate for them and they declined it, and then somebody else comes in and says, "Oh, well, you need this," and it's 10% cheaper than the one you were offered through Impact. Well, yeah, then there's a problem, and you end up with this fragmented service set, which is not going to help anybody except the consultant who gets the kickback.
So
That's all to say, unless Bob is my buddy, in which case he does great work. And
as long as Bob's your friend, then
as long
he's
as
okay.
he's my buddy, he's great. He's a good guy, and I appreciate everything he does and would recommend him to everyone.
So fair enough. I guess what I'm getting at is, Neil, you brought up a really good point, which is if you've already upgraded your core managed services offering set to include the fundamentals, this is not really an issue. You're not really exposed, or more likely your customers are not really exposed. It's when you're dealing with, let's face it, it's the highly reactive customer. It's the customer that just has rejected for years upon years, a lot of your attempts to get them to modernize their IT management cyber practices. They're the ones really, we're talking about here. But they're not going to get a CISO outsourced or otherwise anyway, are they? I mean, they wouldn't.
No,
care about
but
that.
they're probably open to the bigger, faster, stronger conversation. If they've always rejected these value-added security services that we know are the right thing to do, then they're very, very budget conscious. And if somebody says, independently comes to them and say, "Hey, we can get you a outsourced MSSP for $19 per seat per month," and they look at you and well, yeah, why didn't you give me this? Because it's crap. It's obviously crap. But they're going to be open to that conversation. That's just not a good customer to have.
And I think sometimes you run into those scenarios where, when you haven't built the relationship with the C-level leadership team of your client, and then the partner, the CEO, whatever, is at an event or a webinar or a conference or something, and someone gets their ear just the right way, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we should talk about this." And I have some IT guys that are helping, and they don't see it the right way, and I think those are opportunities. But that goes back all the way to that, some of those first points we made about why we do and have and want to have a relationship at that level of the business, is because I think a lot of times we do and can do a lot more than people at least thought 5+ years ago. I guess 6 years ago now. Yeah.
Yeah. Good point. So I've got a series of questions in the remaining time we have here today that I just want to resolve some of these open-ended issues that we've been raising. First, I hear no objection from either of you that the modern day MSP not just ought to be in the C-suite, but has every right and is very logically placed entering into the C-suite. True? Not true?
Very true.
The modern day MSP existing inside the C-suite of their customer does, however, have very real boundaries or areas where you will not go, let's say leading into true CSO, CIO, vCISO types of roles, but you will. So let me stop there. There are no-go boundaries. Let's call it CISO, true CISO functions that the modern day MSP should not perform. True. Okay. But I hear that you wouldn't either of you have problems in creating partially in the composite or in the aggregate elements of what a CISO would do if the client had the funds, had the ability and the means to do it, that you will provide a value to the customer that I want to say would be vCISO territory, but it's skirting around it. It's not taking on the risk, Travis, to your point. You're not going to be listed on any internal corporate documents. Neil brought it up. You have no problem advising and helping a customer reach a conclusion, even if they have to go do the rest of it themselves, the last mile themselves, or maybe go out to somebody else to help them do that. Is that a fair statement?
I think for us, it depends kind of on the scope of what the client's looking for. If it's just, hey, help us get these policies in place, and you guys are great, and we're good, let's check a few more boxes here. Sure, we can help with that. When they get into third-party vendor management, risk assessment, risk, like they're talking about maintaining a risk register, things like that. That's where we start to say, like, okay, maybe this is the time to bring in a third party. One, just like the scope of the project, what they're talking about and looking for is where that accountability that we need to have between the client and us. I think that's where that comes into play. So smaller clients, absolutely. Larger clients, that's where we get into more complex situations. Yeah.
What's the trigger though, Neil? I mean, what Travis just said is the trigger different for every MSP, or is the trigger something that we can define and apply as a neutral principle that can be applied for all MSPs?
I think you have to know your lane. So there's no problem us working with a risk register when it comes to IT related risks. But for an organization to say, oh, yes, now we have a risk register. No, you don't. You have an IT risk register. There's 1,000 other things that apply to your business that I am not qualified to talk about. What is the risk of a roof collapse because you didn't have your beams inspected and there's a large snow load expected this year? I have absolutely no idea. And we've got to be careful to scope our work and our responses to this is IT.
Next question. Do either of you believe that there are your colleagues, other MSPs, who are being tempted and are in fact crossing that boundary into vCISO areas that they ought not to do? You don't have to name names. I'm just curious if you think that it's happening.
I think it's being marketed and sold that way. I'm not really concerned that it's being effectively delivered as a true CISO service. It just has that title.
Yeah.
They're calling it, but it's not really what it is.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a pretty jaded, cynical take on this, but I feel like there's tools and platforms available now to help facilitate this. They see from a market standpoint that MSPs already have a large existing client base, and if they can just sell one MSP, they're going to sell 80 businesses or 100 businesses or however large the MSP is on it. And then on the flip side, the MSP is very used to buying another tool to add another service line to their business. Right? You go buy KnowBe4, now you can resell and have this managed service. You go buy Huntress and you have a managed service. I think this one is not, I think the people and process that it takes to implement this managed service is very different than the ones that do vulnerability management and patching and backup and EDR and that kind of stuff. Because this gets way more consultative, high level, C-level conversations that your tier 1, tier 2 service desk guys are not going to be able to, you're not going to upskill them into vCISO work. And I think that's where this is going to stumble a little bit, is the owner is doing all the vCISO work, or they're not really doing it right, or a tech is administering a portal and not actually understanding the governance and controls that are relevant to what they're doing. But that here's a market, and here's people who are used to buying tools because it's $100 per client per month. Okay, I can build that into my pricing. The vendor is winning there because you're selling their product, but is the client getting value out of what you're providing? Or are you putting yourself at risk by representing that you're providing something that you're not actually doing a good job at? Those are all the questions that come to my mind when I see that.
Yeah, I think they're getting some pretty reports and some checklists and reminders, but they're not getting a true, like you say, consultative service. It's a vacuous CISO instead of a virtual CISO.
And I would be curious, MSP Alliance would have the best insight to this as far as cyber verified or SOC 2 audited MSPs that go through this process regularly. So they understand the depth and the complexity that it takes to actually complete one of these certifications or audits. How many of them are doing this in addition to, or is it the ones who whatever the opposite of the curse of knowledge is, right? Like we have the curse of knowledge. I know what it takes to do this. It's a huge pain in the butt. It's a ton of work. So I'm a lot more hesitant to go sell this to clients because to do it right is a big thing, as opposed to those who are like, I don't know, and all like a certification, sure, like check a few boxes. And uh, I'd be curious what those numbers look like.
It's no doubt. I think Neil touched on this very accurately, which is it's a catchphrase, right? Just like MSP to MSSP was a catchphrase mantra of you're not really a true managed service provider unless you have the extra S in the middle of it, which I think was a completely bogus, completely shallow, but highly effective marketing tool by mostly vendors. To your point, Travis, I think that most MSPs now are, because they're already in the C-suite, when they are asked to weigh in on a topic of, I've got a CMMC demand letter, right? I've got to act on this issue of CMMC, or if it's a bank, I have to get SOC 2, or pick your framework because it's coming from every angle across the globe. The MSP has the choice to make of be involved, be engaged, and do it smartly, do it intelligently, as both of you have been advising, or to just not engage at all. I think not engaging at all is a perilous choice. And that, I think, really gets to comfort. What are they comfortable doing? Don't do something if you're not comfortable or proficient at it. But I think, it's more like the pen test. You have to have strategic partners and you have to be able to say, I know exactly what you ought to do with regards to a pen test, even if I'm not the one who's going to do it. This is how it's going to happen. That is, I think, more along the lines of where the MSPs ought to be, even if you throw out the vCISO tool, moniker, which I think, Neil, I think that's a really good point. Right, vCISO is probably something that's horrifically misapplied here, and maybe we need a different name. I don't know what that name is, but
no, hey, it's great marketing though. It works.
It works.
Sounds very cool. Official, virtual officer, information security, like those are good buzzwords. You need to figure out how to work AI into it, and it's perfect.
Your virtual AI
information
CISO
security,
bot, yeah. Good luck with that one. Gentlemen, we've reached the end of our time. I think that for those of you listening out here, I hope that this was helpful because, number one, don't feel awkward or out of place having a seat inside the C-suite because you've worked for decades to achieve that level of status and professionalism. You ought to be there if you're proficient and if you've earned it. But I think that there are real, as both of our guests said, there are real boundaries that you ought not to cross. And it's not just, don't do pen testing. It's conflict of interest. There's some ethical things. Are we the right party to do this? But if you're not the right party, you still have a role to say, we're not going to do this, but this is what we think ought to be done. And I think that that's what I've heard from both of you is that you as the MSP are still not governing. You are involved in helping the customer shape their own opinions and arrive at their own proper conclusions. Is that a fair way to resolve this issue?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right on.
Without getting involved in going that further step into mounting more risk on your shoulders where it ought not to be. Yeah. All right. Well, I hope we did justice to this very complicated discussion. It could probably go on for many, many hours and probably will in many other parts of the globe. But for now, Neil Holm, Travis Springer, thank you both for joining us on the MSP Zone. Until next time, stay safe.
Charles.